What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy, and today I'm going to be going over my tournament report for the recent Toronto Regionals that I was able to attend. So I just got back from Canada not too long ago. I'm finally settled back in, and I wanted to go over just a quick little tournament report while the event was still fresh in my mind. So this tournament was actually pretty exciting. It's actually my first time ever being outside the country, which is kind of cool. You know, not only did I get to see a bit of the world, but got to play some Pokemon in the process, which is definitely an awesome reason to be able to travel a little bit. And also, too, another reason I was very excited for this event is prior to the weekend, I was sitting at, I believe, 380 championship points, which means I was only 20 away from getting my Worlds invite and playing at the World Tournament in Tennessee this year. So that means if I just got top 128 or better at this event, I would get enough points to actually go to Worlds. So, you know, like I said, pretty big weekend going on. First time leaving the country, and like I said, the potential to also wrap up my Worlds invite. So if you guys were not familiar with Toronto Regionals, this was a standard format tournament, which means sets all the way back from Breakthrough all the way up to Ultra Prism were going to be legal for play. So even though Forbidden Light actually technically has released at the time of the tournament, it wouldn't actually be legal until the following weekend. So that means cards like Ultra Necrozma, Malamar Beast Ring, etc. weren't going to be legal for this particular event. So that means a lot of the decks we're kind of used to seeing at this point were kind of expected to be there. You know, your Buzzwole decks, Zoroark decks, Tapu Bulu, etc. The metagame is pretty much solidified at this point, so there shouldn't be too many surprises at this event. That's what I was kind of expecting. And I know a lot of people actually kind of feel that this format has been a bit stale, and you know, I kind of agree with that to an extent, just because things haven't really been changing that much over the past several weeks. But I actually like that. I've said this before in a couple of other regional tournament reports. I like these types of major events where the metagame has solidified a lot, because it actually, I think, makes picking a deck pretty easy to do, because you know really exactly what is going to show up. Unlike where, had this been a Forbidden Light legal event, you don't really have an idea of what the metagame is going to look like. Now, of course, you kind of know some decks that might show up, but generally speaking, it's going to be a blind format, and you really don't know what is the strongest play. Whereas, like I said, in a format like this, where the metagame is very defined, it makes picking a deck a little bit easier, which is something I like. So that then begs the question, what to actually play for this event. So for this format, I've previously played a couple of decks at Regionals. I've played Zoroark Lycanroc back at Charlotte Regionals, also played Espeon Garbodor back at Collinsville. So I had a couple of decks kind of in my back pocket that I know I could fall back on if I couldn't figure out anything else that I really wanted to play. Buzzwole Lycanroc, I think definitely one of the best decks in the format. I could have played that. Really just not a big fan of the play style of the deck. Definitely a good deck, but like I said, don't really enjoy the play style, and I know it's a deck that has kind of a target on its head, but nevertheless, I definitely think that would have been also a very fine pick. But like I said, Zoroark, Lycanroc, and Espeon were some decks I was initially considering. But one deck I actually was doing a little bit of testing with was Gourgeist. Kind of a definitely a card you don't see too often, but honestly, I think one that actually has had some potential. It's done well at some League Cups ever since it's been legal, but it hasn't really had like a big breakout success at any major events. But the reasons I was considering it was because you can knock out basically everything in the format, and specifically Buzzwole, you hit it for weakness, so it makes taking knockouts on that deck pretty easy. And also, you're just a one prize attacker, which is kind of nice as well. Being able to take big one-hit knockouts, only giving up a single prize in the process, is definitely something very appealing to me. But ultimately, I decided against the deck. You know, I really didn't have that much time in with the deck to, I think, really perfect a list that I would feel comfortable enough with taking to a major event like this. Also, too, you know what, I just need some championship points here to seal up this World's invite, and I didn't want to risk, you know, whiffing top 128 or better with, you know, just playing kind of like a meme deck. So I felt like maybe picking something a little bit more established would have been maybe a safer play for this event. So, like I mentioned, I did have Zoroark Lycanroc and Espeon Garbodor kind of in my back pocket, and ultimately I decided on Espeon Garbodor for a few reasons. You know, one, I've actually been playing Garbodor decks in Expanded and Standard for this quarter pretty heavily, and so it was a deck I was very comfortable with playing, especially for 9 rounds. This is another big reason why I chose this over Lycanroc, or Zoroark Lycanroc, I should say. So with Zoroark decks, there's a lot of micro decisions that go into every game, whereas Espeon Garbodor, it's, you know, attach an energy, play a draw supporter, and then from there, maybe you can attach a tool or something, but generally speaking, your plays are a lot more straightforward with Espeon over, I think, Zoroark, Lycanroc. When I played Zoroark in Charlotte, I really noticed that by the end of the day, I was a little bit mentally drained, and I sometimes found it a little bit difficult to make the correct decision at all times, just because there's so many different little decisions that go into a turn with Zoroark. So yet again, I was thinking this is going to be a 9-round tournament. I really want to just stay sharp the whole day and make sure that I can just walk away with some championship points. So I felt like if I played Espeon Garbodor, I'd be less likely to make misplays, since your plays are a little bit more limited than they are with Zoroark deck. So that's the reason why I ultimately settled on the deck. Also, it doesn't hurt that you also hit Buzzwole for weakness, which is one of the best decks in the format. So I just think a lot of good things Espeon had going for it. So let's take a look at the actual list that I used for this event. So just looking at the deck list, it doesn't look actually like anything special. It's just very straightforward, just straight consistency. There's maybe only like one card of it, noteworthiness in this list that we can go over shortly. But just taking a look at the Pokemon line, of course, we have our 4-4 Garbodor line, and we're playing the split between the 2 Trash Range and 2 Garbotoxin. That way we have, our good late game attacker in the form of Trash Range Garbodor, and we also have that element of control to the deck with Garbotoxin to show off abilities. And we have our kind of like toolbox of other attackers from there. Of course, the 2-2 Espeon GX line, very good against things like Buzzwole and those Psychic weak attackers. Also the Confusion, very good with Psybeam, and Divide GX, a very, very good GX attack for picking off like low HP basics. And we of course run Tauros GX and Drampa GX. Those are going to be some additional more situational backup attackers, and of course our 3-tap with Lele's to get supporters out of our deck. Also, similarly for the energy count, very, very straightforward, just 4 double colorless, 7 psychic energy. And for our trainer cards, play 10 draw supporters total, but we're favoring the high count of N, maxing that out. I've said this a bunch in other videos. I think Parallel City, Garbotoxin, and N is just one of the strongest combos that we currently have access to in the game. So maxing out our copies of N over other draw supporters, I think is going to be a little bit more ideal in this type of deck. Then 3 Guzma, 1 Bridget. And of course, just looking at the rest of the cards, really straightforward stuff. Our 2 Parallel City. That way we can limit our opponent's bench size, maxing out our tool cards. That way we have, the most chances of drawing into them. 2 Field Blower, 1 Super Rod. But the card of interest in this list is going to be 1 copy of Palpad. And I've got to say, this is actually probably my MVP of the weekend. I actually, prior to this event, had this as a, not Super Rod, but a Rescue Stretcher, just as an additional form of recovery. But it was definitely kind of a flexible spot in the list. And actually talking with a player that I stayed with for the duration of this event, Carl Barone, just want to give a quick shout out to him. He actually convinced me to play Palpad for this event over Rescue Stretcher, and super happy that I did. Definitely a card I got a ton of value out of, and I think the big reason I chose to play this is because a lot of times with Espeon Garbodor, I find that sometimes N in Garbodor is bad for yourself. I've played so many games with Garbodor variants where you play an N or a Cynthia or something, and then you just don't have much to work with from there in terms of draw supporters. So I like having Palpad. It kind of effectively serves as like a 4th Guzma, or just getting a couple of extra Sycamores back into your deck to, ensure that in the late game you never draw dead under your own Garbotoxin lock. So Palpad, a card, like I said, I got a ton of value out of from this weekend, and overall I just really like this list. There's really not a card I would change here. I know some people favor a 4th Guzma over Palpad as an example. Some people might also like Rescue Stretcher, but honestly, after playing this for the entire event, I really have no complaints with this list whatsoever. I think this is perfectly fine. Even going into the new format, maybe you want to play some Mysterious Treasures, but other than that, I really don't think there's too many cards I would change even going into the new Forbidden Light format. But that's a different discussion we can have later. But this is a list, like I said, that I settled on for this event. But let's head over to my matchups, and I'll run down how my day went at this event. So round 1, I get paired against Zoroark, Lycanroc. Definitely a deck that I expected to see at this event. You pretty much have to be prepared to play against Zoroark at some point with a 9-round tournament like this. Getting paired against this right away, I had no problems with it. Definitely a matchup I'm pretty used to at this point. And I was able to take this one 2-0. I forget how game 1 went. I think it was honestly just kind of back and forth. But for game 2, it was a little bit more interesting. I remember my opponent, they didn't really have much on their opening turn. They started Lele, and I think they just played a single puzzle of time. So definitely a pretty uneventful first turn for them, and I did have to end them out of that, but luckily I did. I think my opponent said he was going to have Bridget right away for next turn, so I did still bail him out of that hand. And similarly for myself, I think a turn or so later I had a completely dead hand and my opponent was forced to end me out of that as well. So a little bit of an awkward start for both decks. But, you know, not too much else to really report on for the duration of this matchup. I believe it was pretty back and forth, but I was able to take this one 2-0, which also is just a really nice thing starting out at a big 9-round tournament like this. No one likes to lose, but especially losing early in the day is also really disheartening, and it just puts a lot of extra pressure on you to perform well for the rest of the day. At this event, you had to go, I believe it was 6-2-1 or 6-1-2 or better. I think it was 19 match points you needed to make day 2, if my memory serves me correct. So I knew that I could really only afford maybe 2 losses total without any ties for the rest of the day, ideally. So like I said, starting out with a win is definitely a good thing. Definitely don't want to take any early losses. Going into round 2, I get paired against a Tapu Bulu player. Definitely another deck I'm very comfortable with seeing at this point. And I feel like my deck's actually pretty favored against it. Tapu Bulu, I do think, has some potential to jump ahead in the early game, but I think by the late game, Espeon Garb is definitely the favored in the matchup here, just because you have Garbotoxin, you have Trash Lanch to hit for large amounts of damage. Espeon GX is also a very annoying attacker, you know, forcing these big 3 retreat Pokemon to be confused, forcing them to attack into you is really nice for the deck. But anyways, game 1, my opponent has a horrendous start. They just opened with a Lele, and I remember my opponent had 3 Vicavolts and a Sycamore in hand, and so they just drew past for a few turns, and I was able to just kind of set up, you know, pretty much going unchecked. I had an amazing start. So my opponent scooped probably about halfway through the game, realizing, you know what, this is a bad game, we just need to save time. And in game 2, my opponent did end up winning. I do remember it was a very, very close game, but he hit heads on a confusion flip and was able to take his last knockout. Otherwise, I believe I had the game next turn. So a very, very close game 2. And game 3, also a very, very close game. And basically at the end, I believe we are tied on prizes, and time did get called. Or no, I think what it was is, yeah, I was actually very ahead, if I remember correctly. Yes, I think that's what happened. I was actually definitely ahead in the match, but time got called in the round, and basically I was going to be forced to, you know, close out this game. Otherwise, this series would end in a tie. And I remember I had gone through 3 float stones, and I only had 1 left in deck. And then my opponent, what was it? Yeah, he Guzma'd up my Garbodor without a floatstone on it, and I top decked the floatstone that I needed to retreat and take a knockout with Trash Lanch. So super, super close series, but I was able to wind up winning that one, starting out 2-0 overall for the day. Going on to round 3, I get paired against another Zoroark variant, but this time my opponent is playing Lucario GX, which I'm actually a little bit excited to see because Lucario is, of course, weak to Psychic, which I think inherently gives me a little bit of an advantage here. So game 1, if I remember correctly, it was pretty back and forth, but my opponent was able to seal that one up, which, you know, kind of took me a little bit by surprise. You know, I kind of went into this matchup thinking I was going to be in a good spot, but my opponent won, so had me kind of rethinking maybe what my chances actually were in this matchup. But game 2, I was able to win that. I think my opponent actually scooped about halfway through the game. Then going on to a game 3, my opponent has a terrible start. He opened, I believe it was a lone Regirock EX, and he mulliganed 3 times. And I think he just played a single puzzle of time on his opening turn, and that was it. A terrible start for my opponent. And all of the mulligans that my opponent gave me a play where I was able to bridge it, get down a double colorless energy on Lele and a choice band. And with that, I was able to do 90 damage to this Regirock EX since my opponent had an energy on it, and basically threatened just donking him. He was able to, I believe, top deck a supporter or something to get back into the game on his next turn, but my board was just getting set up just super, super well, and he was not able to, you know, successfully get back into the game. I just set up, you know, way too dominantly by that point. So I was able to take round 3, starting off 3-0 for the day, definitely feeling really well at this point. But then for round 4, I get paired up against a Gardevoir variant. This is going to be the Gardevoir Talonflame variant that has been floating around a little bit. And, you know, to be honest, I have not actually ever even played against this version. I've seen it around a little bit, but never actually played any games against it. But overall, I feel pretty confident about my chances against it. The confusion is really good against Garbodor. Also, you punish them for attaching a lot of energy to take knockouts since you have Espeon GX. So overall, I just feel like my deck is in a position to do well. So game one, I am actually in an immensely dominant lead over my opponent. I remember I went down 4 prizes before he took a single prize. And, you know, like I said, my deck was working great. I felt really good about the spot I was in. But then I got hit with an N down to 2, I believe it was. And then from there, I was never able to, you know, close out the game, and my opponent just swept me. He even had a Gardevoir GX that had, I think it was like 160 damage on it, and all I needed was a Guzma or even just a draw supporter to draw an energy, and I would have been able to actually take a knockout. Since my opponent had a Mew EX in the active as well, that was also pretty heavily damaged. So like I said, all I needed was either a Guzma or a way to draw into an energy to knock out this Mew EX he had been attacking me with. And I was just never able to find it. And like I said, after that end, I had nothing, and my opponent was able to just sweep my board from there. So game one, I'm feeling pretty bad. I felt like the game kind of got stolen from me a little bit just because, like I said, my deck was doing so well. Game two, though, I was a little bit worried because game one did take up so much time. And game two, definitely much more back and forth. And yet again, another similar situation where I got hit with an N in like the mid to late game where I just didn't have much of anything. But eventually I was actually able to draw out of that and hop back into the game. And I was narrowly able to take my last prize to win game two. But unfortunately, that was actually the end of time. And we did not have enough time to actually play a game three. So unfortunately, I was forced to tie this one. You know, not the end of the world. I'm still 301. That is fine. I just need 3 more wins for the day, and I can safely ID into day 2 of the tournament. So next up for round 5, I am playing against Buzzwole Garbodor, and this is actually Andrew Mahone, fellow PokeTuber from Darium's competitive Pokemon. Andrew, I definitely knew to be a very, very solid player going into this round. I was optimistic about my chances just given the matchup itself, but nevertheless, I knew that Andrew was probably going to play this matchup very, very well, and I wouldn't be able to afford any misplays against him. But nevertheless, like I said, I do think this matchup was actually very, very favored. With these Garbodor variants, they typically don't play Lycanroc GX, which is usually the main threat that Buzzwole Lycanroc kind of poses against this Espeon Garbodor deck. So since that Andrew didn't run that, I felt like my chances were very, very good. And as I expected, both games kind of went just how I thought they would. I was able to pretty convincingly take both of these games over on Andrew. There were a couple of interesting things that happened at different points, though. There was one game where Andrew missed 2 Max Elixirs, which actually would have been pretty big at different points. Also, I had a turn where I whiffed the Trashalanche Garbodor to take a knockout, but I did have a Choice Banded Trubbish to Acid Spray for 80 on a Buzzwole, and I hit heads on the coin flip, discarding an energy, preventing Andrew from actually doing a pretty crucial play. So a couple of interesting things happened throughout the series, but overall, like I said, I took the series pretty convincingly. Like I said, definitely one of my more favored matchups that I could have run into. So I'm going to be 401 at this point, so yet again, feeling really good about how my day is going. I just have to win 2 more, and I'm basically guaranteed day 2 of the tournament at that point. So next up, going into round 6, I get paired against a Ho-Oh Salazzle deck. And initially when my opponent flipped over a Volcanion EX, I was ecstatic because I think this is actually definitely one of the more favored matchups that I could run into, just because you have Parallel City to limit their bench size, or to reduce their damage output. You have Garbotoxin so that your opponent can't steam up. Then also you just punish Ho-Oh GX for needing 4 energy with Espeon GX and even Tapu Lele GX as well. So like I said, just a ton of good things going on for my deck in this matchup, and I expected fully to actually win this series if my deck would just set up kind of like as expected. So game 1 was actually pretty back and forth. My opponent was able to actually get ahead and take an early knockout with Ho-Oh GX on turn 2. He was able to hit the switch that he needed to switch into the active and knock out my Tapu Lele. Definitely a pretty big point in the game. Being able to take that early lead was really big, and I didn't have another attacker to actually respond with But nevertheless, the game wound up being very, very close. I think I got down to one prize, but my opponent had game in hand. I forget what their board was like, but they ended up having the game there. So game two, even though I lost game one, we still actually had a decent amount of time left. And like I said, I feel really good about my chances in this matchup, especially too if I'm going first, since I did not in game one. I remember going first, I feel like I'm in an even better spot, because if I can successfully get down a Psychic Energy on an Eevee and get Espeon, next turn if I have DCE Guzma, I can just take a knockout on a Ho-Oh if they use Kiawe. So I feel really good about my chances, like I said, in this matchup. So I Ultra Ball on first turn, and I realize I have Bridget and 2 double colorless energies prized, which is a pretty big problem, actually. I was able to set up kind of half decently. I think I just played like a Cynthia or something my first turn instead. Got the Espeon GX into play. And then on my opponent's next turn, they played Kiawe to set up Ho-Oh, and all I needed from there was a double colorless energy to actually knock the thing out, and that was my opponent's only attacker that they even had. So if I was able to take a knockout on this Ho-Oh GX, I was going to be in a very, very dominant position, I think, to win the game. But from there, I remember I sycamored my hand away. I had some other supporters that I could have used to maybe potentially save some resources, but like I said, I really need to take a knockout on the Ho-Oh, and I whiffed the double colorless energy. Kind of expected, since I had 2 of them prized, just nothing I could have done from there to really ensure my chances of hitting one. So, and kind of what I was thinking from there is, I can still use Psybeam and force my opponent to flip a coin to take a knockout with Phoenix Burn. But unfortunately, my opponent had a switch and an energy on, I think, a bench Giurleo, to where they could retreat back into the Ho-Oh and use Phoenix Burn without having to flip for the confusion. They also had the Choice Band as well to finish taking a knockout on my Espeon. So my opponent just punished me so harshly for whiffing the double colorless energy on that turn, and honestly, that kind of sealed up the game. From there, my opponent was in just a super dominant position. My only attacker had gone down, and I just didn't have much of anything else the rest of the game afterwards. It was a pretty rough matchup, and unfortunately, I lose this one 2-0, or 0-2, I guess, technically. And so from there, that puts me at 4-0-1, yet again, taking a loss or a tie to a deck that I should actually have a favorable matchup to. And Ho-Oh specifically, I think, is actually very favorable. So I feel, I'm in kind of rough shape after this one. That one really got to me, because like I said, I feel like this should be a matchup that I am in a good spot to win. But like I said, I still just need 2 more wins, and I can safely ID into day 2 of the tournament. Next up for round 7, my opponent flips over Tapu Bulu, and I am pretty happy about this one. Yet another super good matchup that I think I have here. I took a win over it earlier in the day. I've also just played this matchup a lot, and I kind of just know what to expect. So game 1, our game kind of goes as expected for me. I was able to set up pretty well. My opponent did take a couple prizes here and there, but overall my deck just kind of worked how I expected it to. And game 1 actually took a very, very long time, if my memory serves me correctly. So when we started the shuffle up for game 2, I just remember feeling very positive about this series, because I was thinking, you know what, I don't even know if this game is going to finish. As long as I don't get donked, I feel like this game will just go long enough anyways to where we'll just tie this match and I'll win the series. Unfortunately, I whiffed a couple of pretty crucial things at different points in the game. You can maybe debate if they were suboptimal plays or not, but just to give it an example, I remember there was one turn where I whiffed a Float Stone to activate my Garbotoxin lock. Another turn a little bit later in the game, I remember I was going to Sycamore, and I had a Choice Band in hand, and I had a Trash Ranch Garbodor and a Trubbish, or like a Garbodor without a Float Stone. No, I think it was just a regular Trubbish on the bench at that point. And I had a Choice Band. I was debating, do I put the Choice Band on this Trash Ranch Garbodor, because I was a little bit short of threatening a knockout with it the next turn, or I could get down the Choice Band on the Trubbish, and if I hit the Garbotoxin Garbodor, I can activate Ability Lock and, kind of control my opponent's, abilities and things like that. And I opted to put it on the Trash Ranch Garbodor because had I done that, I was going to take a knockout this turn, going down to 2 prizes. And next turn, if I can hit a Psychic Energy, I can actually just knock out my opponent's last Tapu Bulu to win the game. So I opted to get down the Choice Band to ensure that I would have enough damage. And from there, I played my Sycamore. I whiffed the tool, but I did have the Garbotoxin Garbodor in hand. I was able to evolve, but like I said, I did not have a tool to activate my opponent's, or to turn off my opponent's abilities. But nevertheless, I feel decent. I just need to find a Psychic Energy and I can win the game from there. But then next turn, I believe my opponent, I think they N, or I forget what it was, but basically my opponent took a knockout on my Espeon GX that I had, and then from there, like I said, I just needed to find this Psychic Energy and I could win the game. But basically what had happened was, I think my opponent N'd, if I remember correctly, and I didn't really have much to work with. I had a Tapu Lele GX in play with a double colorless energy, and you know, I had this Garbotoxin Garbodor sitting on my bench with no Floatstone. I had this Trash Ranch Garbodor sitting on my bench with no energy. And I remember I had a Parallel City in hand. And at this point, time has been called. And we were both down to our last, like, 2 prizes. So basically, one of us, whoever takes the knockout, is going to win the series. Or win this game, I should say. So whoever is able to take the last GX knockout here is going to win this game. So basically, I was in a difficult situation. I had no supporter in hand, no energy, but I had a Parallel City, and I think like a Trash Ranch Garbodor or something. Something like that I didn't need at all. And I had this Lele with a double colorless energy, and basically what I could do is I could attack this Tapu Bulu with my Tapu Lele and put down the Parallel City facing myself with the blue side. That way it reduces my opponent's damage output. And my opponent only had like a 2-card hand at this point. And basically, if I play the Parallel City towards myself, it forces them to have a choice band in order to knock me out. Or an alternate play I could have done, I had a Trubbish on my bench. I could have retreated into Trubbish and just kind of sacrificed it and hoped that I would draw into an energy or like a supporter for next turn or something like that. But what I opted to do was, since my opponent only had the 2-card hand and I knew that they didn't have like a supporter they were sitting on, I went for the Parallel City, put it towards myself, limiting my own damage, or I'm sorry, limiting my opponent's damage output, and use Energy Drive for like 100 something damage. But my opponent top decks the Choice Band and they are able to knock out my Tapu Lele with the Nature's Judgment to win the game. But because time was called, we don't have time for a game 3. And unfortunately, the series is in a tie. And I remember I was so heartbroken too, because my next card that I would have top decked would have been a Psychic Energy. So had I promoted the Trubbish, let it get knocked out, then I would have actually won the whole series. So I'm feeling actually pretty bad about this at this point, because yet again, another matchup that I feel really confident about. I feel really good about this Tapu Bulu matchup. I didn't have like a supporter or anything in hand for a couple turns, those last few turns, and I just kind of felt like the game had gotten stolen from me, and I was pretty heartbroken, because this at this point ensures I have to win my last 2 games. I can't tie, I can't lose anymore, otherwise I can't make day 2 of the tournament. So after this round 7 tie, it puts a lot of pressure on me, but you know what? I'm still in it. I feel confident about most of my matchups that I've been seeing around at the top tables. So just have to cross my fingers, hope I hit some good matchups for my last 2 rounds. But round 8, when I check the pairings, I see I'm getting paired against Sam Chen, which is not what I want to see. Sam is another very, very solid player. I knew that I would definitely have a hard time no matter what deck he is playing. But luckily, I did hear he was playing Buzzwole Lycanroc, so I was at least thinking, you know what, I at least have kind of a favorable matchup here that I'm getting paired against. So that was the silver lining to my situation. So it was just kind of stressful. You know, I have to win my next 2 games, but I'm getting paired against one of the best players in North America. So yeah, like I said, a lot of pressure riding on this game. But unfortunately, the series did not work out so well for me. I forget a lot of the specifics around game 1, but I do remember there was a crucial point in the game where Sam was able to take a knockout on a fresh Espeon GX. I had like a heavily damaged Espeon and a heavily damaged, I believe, Tapu Lele on the board at that point. And he was able to goose up my fresh Espeon that I had been building up and take a knockout on that, and basically just leaving me with a bunch of really inefficient attackers for the rest of the game, since they were all kind of in danger of being knocked out. So if I were to attack with my other Espeon as an example, well, guess what? It's just going to get knocked out the following turn. And it basically just set him up to where he could easily pick off my last attackers to wrap up game 1. So, you know, the game 1 went okay. But overall, Sam, I think, like I said, that was a pretty big turn that he had, that he was able to take a knockout on that fresh Espeon GX. So game 2, though, you know, I'm thinking, it's okay. It's still just a Buzzwole deck. I can beat this. But game 2, I open Lone Drampa GX and like no supporters at all. It was pretty bad. Or actually, no, I think I had a Cynthia in hand, but I just Cynthia'd into absolutely nothing. And during this time, Sam was able to just go unchecked with his setup, getting everything in play that he kind of would want to. And I also realized I had 2 Trash Lanch Garbodors prized because I didn't get to search my deck very well in the early turns because I didn't have access to Bridget. I was forced to being able to use draw supporters, and like I said, after that initial Cynthia, I didn't have anything for a few turns. I eventually, of course, did get a draw supporter to hop back into the game, but by that point it was too late, and like I said, in conjunction with my 2 Trash Range Garbodors being prized, it was just a terrible game. And unfortunately, I lose this one 2-0 again to another pretty good matchup. So I gotta say, guys, I was really bummed because I started out the day 4-0-1. I was really confident this is going to be my regional that I'm going to make day 2 at, and kind of solidify not only my World's invite but also get some money in the process and win some prizes. So even though I was a little bit upset over this last loss, the silver lining was that, hey, if I just win my last game, I still make top 128, which is honestly kind of the main reason I've been traveling so heavily. It's to secure this World's invite. If I can just win this last game of the day, like I said, I'll be at 5-2-2, and I will win some championship points to secure my invite. And round 9, I get paired against yet another Buzzwole Lycanroc deck. So one more chance to get an easy win here. And this series, my deck worked much more optimally. In game 1, I don't remember too much about the specifics of the game, but both of us set up, I think, pretty normally from what I can recall, just kind of a normal back and forth game, but I believe I wound up just being a little bit ahead towards the mid to late game, and I believe my opponent scooped to go to game 2, if I remember correctly. But anyways, yeah, game 1, pretty decent game, but I was just a little bit further ahead than my opponent and was able to win that one pretty convincingly. Game 2, my opponent actually has a very strong start. They end up taking 4 prizes by, I think, like their 3rd turn. So they had just an immensely aggressive start. But I wasn't even that worried about it because I remember I had, I believe it was an Espeon GX with a Psychic Energy ready to go. And after my opponent knocked out my, I think it was my first Espeon GX going down to 4 prizes, because I think they knocked out like a Drampa earlier. Yeah, they knocked out a Drampa with a Jet Punch and then knocked out an Espeon GX the turn after. But ready to go, I had double Colorless Energy in hand, Choice Band, Garbotoxin, and N all ready to go in the same turn. So even though my opponent was immensely ahead at that point, my opponent didn't really have much else of anything set up for after this first Buzzwole that he had taken all these prizes with. Also, like I said, he took these prizes very quickly, so he still had a pretty large deck at this point. So I was able to take a knockout on this Buzzwole, and then from there my opponent was kind of forced to just kind of set up his board a little bit more by manual attachments. But the thing is, if he were to ever promote a Buzzwole, my Espeon would be able to take a knockout on it, so he was forced to kind of just hide behind a couple of different Pokemon to try to recoup his board. But afterwards, I was able to divide GX, taking out a Rockruff, also a Fates Collide Mew that he had on the board at that point that was a little bit damaged from a Drampa earlier on in the match. And so I was able to go down to 2 prizes pretty quickly. And then from there, my opponent, he just didn't have much else to really work with, and I was able to just pretty easily take my last knockout on another Buzzwole thanks to a Guzma, and I was able to win game 2 very convincingly, which means I was able to finish the day at 5-2-2. So unfortunately, I do think this event was a little bit anticlimactic for me. All of my losses and ties were to good matchups and decks that I really think I shouldn't have lost or tied against most of the time. So like I said, that did bum me out a little bit, but the goal was to get a World's invite, and I did accomplish that. Like I said, going 5-2-2 did put me in top 128 at this event. So I was still pretty happy with how my weekend overall went as a whole. So overall, for the tournament, I did finish 77th out of, I believe, 556 Masters. So still a decent little run. And like I said, it got me those championship points that I needed to get my World's invite. So that means I will be seeing you guys in Nashville this year. Really excited to go play in the World Tournament this year. But as for the other decks that ended up doing well at this event, coming in at 8th, we had a Golisopod Garbodor deck. At 7th, we had Buzzwole Lycanroc. At 6th, we had Buzzwole Lycanroc. At 5th, we had Zoroark Lycanroc. At 4th, we had Zoroark Golisopod. At third, we had Zoroark Garbodor. At second, we had Zoroark Garbodor. And taking the entire tournament was Daniel Altavilla with Buzzwole Lycanroc coming in at the first place spot. So looking at these final standings for top 8, a couple of interesting decks. I think Golisopod Garb was a deck that had kind of fallen off a little bit recently in the past couple months. So kind of interesting that it did wind up taking the 8th spot. Definitely cool to see kind of unexpected decks make their way into top 8s. Similarly, we had 2 Zoroark Garbodor decks filling out the 2nd and 3rd place spots in this top 8. Definitely a deck that has been floating around, but I think it's one that a lot of players haven't taken that seriously. I think most players have been favoring more traditional partners for Zoroark like Lycanroc and Golisopod. So kind of cool to see yet another kind of unexpected deck make its way into the top 8. But as you can see, a lot of Buzzwole here, and just in general, day 2 was filled with Buzzwole. And another reason I was a little bit bummed about not making day 2, just because there were so many good matchups ready for Espeon Garbodor on day 2 of the tournament. But yeah, Buzzwole definitely still a good deck. It definitely has proven itself to be very worthy. It's been just knocking down tournament after tournament, and Toronto Regionals was no different. But like I said though, guys, overall I really enjoyed this weekend. Just want to give a couple of quick shouts to before we wrap up this video. Big shout out to, like I said, Carl Barone, the guy I stayed with for this weekend, for convincing me to play Palpad. Definitely, like I said, kind of my MVP of the weekend, a card that put in just so much work that I got way more value out of than I actually expected to. So big shout out for him for you know, like I said, not only letting me stay with him for the weekend, but also, you know, convincing me to actually play the Palpad. And also, too, just a big shout out to all of the staff that worked at Toronto Regionals. This is actually one of the best run events I've actually ever been to. So I've been to some regionals before where we don't get out until like 12 or 1 o'clock. In the morning, which is insane. But I think the final round ended somewhere around 9 o'clock, which is a great time to get out at for an event of this size. So just like I said, super well run event. I really hope more events in the future are run this smoothly. And also, too, I had people come up and recognize me. I know I don't have my face showing too often on the channel, but somehow a lot of you guys still were able to pick me out of the crowd and were nice enough to come say hi. So big shout out also to everyone who was nice enough to come up and say hi over the weekend. But that's going to pretty much wrap it up for this tournament report. I will actually be going to Virginia Regionals in Roanoke, so if you guys are coming out to Virginia, definitely feel free to say hi if you run into me at that tournament. Definitely looking forward to playing with some of the new cards from Forbidden Light. Definitely happy to put this Ultra Prism format behind us and start, you know, playing with some new decks for a change. But as usual, guys, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you can support this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up something from our online store at rarecandytcg.com, it would mean a lot. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you for the next one.